So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this exclusive interaction with Professor Madhav Das Nalapat. He is the Director of Geopolitics and International Relations and the UNESCO Peace Chair at Manipal University in India. He is also the Editorial Director of the Sunday Guardian, an ITV network in India, and Vice Chair of Manipal University's Advanced Research Group. He's been the editor of Times of India and the editor of Mathrubhumi. He also serves on the board of advisors at USANA's foundation. Professor Nalapat was one of the earliest Indian voices talking about an Asian NATO, a term which has gained increasing recognition only recently. He was also among the first to define the Indo-Pacific as stretching from the Horn of Africa to Vladivostok, Alaska, and Chile. Professor Nalapat, thank you so much for being here. It is an honor to have you here with us. And thank you for taking the time out today. We're really excited for this interview. So, Professor Nalapat, I would first dive directly into the topic, and I would ask you that you were one of the first people to talk about an Asian NATO. So, could you please tell us a little bit about what your vision of this Asian NATO was, and has it changed since you first spoke about it in 2014?
Well, I wish that there was. I mean, there would have been good reason for it to change, but unfortunately, Vishali, the problem is that today also we have a problem, and that problem is very frankly that NATO is not really configured for anything other than Cold War 1.0 between the USSR and the US. It was a perfect instrument for that. It was a very well designed instrument to ensure that the Soviet Union did not move into territory other than what it took over during the Second World War. But I think they were essentially defending against a ghost. I don't think Khrushchev or Brezhnev or even Stalin post the war, I think, was really serious in any kind of a conflict with the West. I mean, the Russians had really bled themselves terribly during the Second World War. I'm very happy that Winston Churchill and Roosevelt were in charge of the UK and the US. I'm unhappy that Churchill was unfortunately dealing with India also because he was responsible for, among other things, attenuation of the Bengal famine. And I think a lot of their policy has been responsible for this very unfortunate division of the subcontinent on this absurd belief that Hindus and Muslims are two separate nations, when quite frankly, you and I know that the faith we profess, the diet we eat, the lifestyle we follow, I mean, these make no difference to what we are as human beings. It's so completely and totally superficial. So I'd only like to say that were it not for Churchill and Roosevelt, they would not have had this alliance with the Soviet Union against Hitler. And as a consequence of that alliance, what happened? Hitler lost even before the first atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And well, I would like to say that I'm not going to, find fault with the decision to take that, to do that, what Truman did. I don't know all the facts behind it. I do know some of the published literature that it would have entailed about 300,000 additional US combat deaths if they had not done so, because the Japanese are a remarkable people and they're pretty fanatic about defending their homeland and about defending the emperor. And finally, the compromise that was reached was the emperor and the emperor system would be spared. And I think the Allies kept their word even when they had fully occupied Japan. So all I'd like to say is that the fact is that Europe needed NATO during the period of the Soviet Union. Frankly, Russia, the treatment of, I'm sorry to go into a slightly involved kind of discussion on this, but I just thought I want you to understand, I mean, under the roots of my understanding on that. The fact is that Yeltsin offered a golden opportunity to the Americans for the Russian Federation, as distinct from the USSR, to come into the fold of the Western Alliance. Neither Germany, nor France, nor the UK at all welcomed that. the French, the Franco-German alliance in particular, they have dominated the European Union for a long time. UK, frankly, I don't know how it got in and why it got out, but it's always been the odd man out. But the Franco-German alliance knew that the minute Moscow entered, that was the end of Franco-German primacy in the EU, and they opposed it tooth and nail. Now, unfortunately, the United States at that point in time, the 1990s, I'm talking about the Clinton period, was then most of the strategic thinking, even on the Pacific coast, was completely Atlanticist. I mean, I remember going there and being treated to, detailed lectures. I mean, by 10, 15 people from, say, the State Department, something. I attended a meeting in which all they said was, why are guys like you, I mean, you means countries that are so poor, even thinking of nuclear weapons, much less having them? This was way before the Pokhran 2, by the way, during the Clinton period, the beginning of the Clinton period. And very importantly, why don't you just hand over Kashmir to Pakistan? After all, that's where it belongs. I pointed out to them, and it's not very easy to deal with a group where you've got 15, 16 persons with a fixed view on one side, and of course, bureaucrats. And unlike Abhinav, I am very respectful of bureaucrats, having encountered them across the world. I take them very seriously. Well, and I said very politely that, look, ours is a country with a large Muslim population. It's at that time not very, as large as what it is there, what was the situation in Pakistan. But today we have around 200 million Muslims. At that point in time, I'm not sure about the number. It must have been about 150 million at a minimum. Well, the reason why 150 million Muslims realize that they are acceptable and safe in India. And I'd like to say that any Indian who does not believe that Muslims, Hindus, Christian, Jains, Sikhs, Buddhists, or atheists have absolutely the same rights to be an Indian as any other Indian, well, that person, frankly, is not a nationalist. Whether he's Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a whatever, he's not a nationalist. A genuine nationalist is an Indian nationalist. There is no sub-classification of the word nationalist. So I said, people like me, I come from a very liberal background. My mother openly converted to Islam about 10 years before she passed away. Actually, she had done that nearly about 15 years before she declared it openly. I think she waited for enough time. I don't know, whatever it is, but she claims that something in her impelled her to declare it at that stage. And well, look, where's the problem? For me, for my brothers, Amma was Amma. My father had already left, unfortunately. He also was perfectly fine with the idea that you sometimes wear a burqa and go out. She never went to temples. And she indulged in a form of prayer, which frankly I did not do. My brothers did not do. My father certainly did not do. He's also, in the sense, in a sense that, so the reality is to come from a very liberal background. Now, why is Kashmir important? Kashmir is important because why Nagaland is important? Why Punjab is important? That even if you have a so-called minority, and I can say from the very beginning, I've been not at all happy with this term minority and majority. For one thing, for example, I'm a Malayali. Am I not a minority in Delhi? Just because I belong to a particular faith, can I be a majority in Delhi? The Malayalis are certainly not a large community in Delhi, or at least as large as they are in some other parts of India. Not to mention, of course, Kerala these days is welcoming a lot of visitors. But I'd only like to say that, it's very important for the idea of India, that the idea of India covers a Kashmir, covers a Nagaland, covers a Punjab. And it's not just because Muslims I mean, Kashmiris, any other part of the country are wonderful people. They're modern, they're moderate, like fortunately Hindus are, or Christians are, or Sikhs are in our country. We are extremely fortunate in that. But it's the idea of India. And if you're telling me, and that's exactly what they told me, Pakistan is a Muslim country. And as a Muslim country, well, Pakistan should have Kashmir because Kashmir is a Muslim state. I said, I mean, there are Muslims in your country. Tomorrow, are you going to set them apart in some ghetto, in some enclave somewhere, maybe in some location like Guantanamo Bay, take over some island and put them there, that, it's a different nation from the Christians? I mean, it's absurd. In Israel, for example, 20% are Arabs. And I'm very happy that a lot of them, most of them, overwhelming majority except, they're Israeli Arabs. They're not Palestinian Arabs. They're Israeli Arabs. They're part of a democracy named Israel, a democracy that, frankly, I've had a soft corner for decades. I've had a soft corner, if I may say so, and this is all reflected in my writing, about a chap called, who is Mohammed bin Salman. You may have heard of him. He's the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Well, there's been a lot of vituperation about him. But the fact is, he's the first Al-Saud to stand up and say, Wahhabism is definitely not the future. It wasn't even the past. He was the first member of that family ever since the Al-Sauds and the Al-Wahhabs entered into this alliance that formed Saudi Arabia. I think an individual such as that deserves support. So that is why from day one, I've been writing in support of him. And of course, I've been told, I'm supporting this or that, or I don't care for human rights. People have questioned my UNESCO affiliation. They have sent umpteen letters to UNESCO. How is this guy UNESCO chair when he's supporting things like Mohammed bin Salman? Recently, they sent a lot of letters that this guy is supporting, strong action by India, military action on the India-China border. How can he do that? As UNESCO chair, he should be begging that arms should be laid down. Well, look, the reality of the situation is that that's fine. You have rules of conduct. And if the other side breaks those rules of conduct have to be changed. And I would like to say, I'm glad UNESCO agreed with me, because despite some efforts, if I may say so, by a particular country, I'm a very polite person. I don't like to name countries. I don't like to name sources. Some people, troll me for that. I'm perfectly happy. If you think I'm talking gibberish, if you think my writing is nonsense, if you think I'm not presenting facts, please don't read them or laugh at them or write about them. I have no problem. But allow me to be myself. But people from one particular location were very unhappy about the routine extension of my UNESCO chair. I was the first UNESCO chair appointed in India. The initial discussion between Federico Mayo Zaragoza, who was then the Director General of UNESCO, an amazing individual, and our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Valiatan at that time, took place in 1998. Soon afterwards, early in the new year, the chair was formed, and Dr. Valiatan, invited me to be the first chair. I accepted, and I was frankly honored to accept, because UNESCO has done amazing work in protection of culture, in protection of human values. But UNESCO has never said that human values and protection of human values should be completely put aside when activities take place that are harmful and opposed to this
his family is
If I could please request the participants to mute themselves.
His wife and his daughter, and he'll be joining them after 2 weeks.
Sir, if you could please mute the participants. Thank you so much. Yes, sir, if you could please continue.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I quite agree that I'd again welcome questions. So I'd only like to point out very simply that, it's the idea of India. And frankly, the idea of India, one difference between India and China, I can tell you. And that is that when Mao Zedong, founded the People's Republic of China, the geographical extent of the People's Republic of China was twice that of any of the previous governments that had been in power in Beijing, whether, pre-imperial or democratic or quasi-democratic, very, very different. It was double virtually. When India was formed, well, India was not double. India was considerably smaller. Abraham Lincoln went into a civil war to ensure the unity of his country. Our people were peaceful. They didn't want to go through with it, and they did not go through it. And I would salute that kind of humanity. But I'd only like to point out that values, when they're under attack, human security and safety in any form, whether in the form of a virus or in any other form, is under attack. It is a duty of those with any respect for humanity to protect and defend them. Hopefully, by methods that are non-kinetic. But if the other side resorts to kinetic measures, well, if you do what Mahatma Gandhi advised the British to do, which is to lay down their arms and invite German soldiers into their homes and Hitler into the island, I think the outcome of the Second World War would have been a little different from what it turned out to be. So I mean, at this stage, if you don't mind, I definitely welcome questions.
Definitely. So going forward from, I think you very appropriately set the context for our discussion, and I'd love to return to your idea on the idea of India. But before that, since you mentioned Cold War, sir, I'll also here like to bring in the fact that you were also one of the first people from India to talk about the new Cold War. So, sir, according to you, do you see Indo-Pacific emerging as the epicenter of this new US-China Cold War? And how do you see India positioning itself in this geopolitical context?
Look, I have been very clear that Cold War 1.0, frankly, given the affiliation of the United States especially, and given the fact that Pakistan, in a sense, was the godchild, if I may say so, of the British, I think that option of joining the Western Alliance, except by surrendering more elements of our sovereignty, was frankly, that option was not there during Cold War 1.0. Today, in Cold War 2.0, it's not between the USSR and the US. It's been the US and China principally. I don't think the option of joining, there are two alliances here. One is the US alliance, which includes the US. I'm not going to say led by the US, includes the US. And the other is the alliance, which is frankly dominated by China. I don't think joining that is an option. And for much the same reason why joining Cold War 1.0 on the side of Washington was not an option, the complete embrace by the PLA and the Central Military Commission of GHQ Rawalpindi. Now, I don't think GHQ Rawalpindi is particularly distinguished for its humanity or humanism or its respect for ethical conduct in battle. I don't think so. And as far as the Chinese are concerned, they are now, as they openly say, iron brothers, iron partners with Pakistan. At the same time, unfortunately, regrettably, in large part because of serial diplomatic errors made by the United States on the instigation of France, Germany, UK, they seem to be slowly coming to their senses, but still way too slowly. I mean, the United States is coming to its senses a little faster. It has accepted the reality of the Indo-Pacific rather than the Atlantic being the cockpit of global this thing. The reality is there was a systemic threat. There was a systemic battle between the USSR system and the US system. India, we had a hybrid, frankly. In large part, our system was based on the USSR system. Whether it was in planning, whether it was in takeover of private industry. I mean, our private sector was just after the Second World War. Definitely much bigger than the shattered Japanese sector and the non-existent South Korean sector. I mean, today, I think Taiwan has about the same foreign exchange reserves as we have. Very little of that is in, through financial institutions investing. A lot of that is much more stable investment. And Taiwan, I think, has got an export basket bigger than India. So that speaks for itself. We adopted the Soviet system. Fortunately, you had an individual called P.V. Narasimha Rao, and my forthcoming book on what I believe Indian foreign policy should be. By the way, I'm happy to say that Kunwar Natwar Singh will be writing the introduction to my book. I love Natwar and I respect Natwar. I mean, we disagree on almost everything. And as he would have discovered on reading my book, preparatory writing his introduction. But one thing is, we can have a civilized conversation with each other. And one of the things we disagreed on was P.V. Narasimha Rao. I regard Narasimha Rao as easily among the best prime ministers India has had, and the architect of, in a sense, reform in India. Why? He was regarded as a very timid man. And actually, he was not timid at all. He has come and stayed with us. He even stayed with me when I was, in a hostel in Trivandrum, because at that time he was only General Secretary of the Ramana Mission Society. His title was General Secretary of the Ramana Mission Society. I don't think he could afford a hotel, so he stayed with me, and he insisted on sleeping on the floor. I felt so guilty I could hardly sleep for the next 3 or 4 nights that Mr. Rao was on the floor in my hostel room. But he was a wonderful man. He was a great man. But, I'd only like to say that he tried very hard for United States to come together. Rock wall of Kashmir, Pakistan as being the Muslim of the subcontinent, and India, the Hindus, the subcontinent, which is, a very, which is slightly, if I may say so, a slightly unscientific way of looking at it. But this time, frankly, we have no option. Why? Because as far as the People's Republic of China is concerned, and allow me to say I've gone there many, many, many times. I would say more than 4 dozen times. I like the people. I respect the Communist Party. And frankly, I think Xi Jinping is a very formidable adversary to have. But adversary he is. But, the fact of the matter is that they know the only country in the world can effectively absorb a substantial degree of decoupling investment from China into another country is India. And Taiwanese themselves have begun decoupling. Japanese have begun decoupling. And may I say, Taiwan, Japan, and the United States are the 3 countries that participated the most in bringing China to where it is. And they are now doing the inevitable decoupling, because 3 or 4 years from now, in much of the world, you're not going to able to buy anything bought in China or having components bought in China, which have been made in China. And that includes the Russian S-400 system, which has got S-4 components, which I'm told have come from China. And secondly, the fact is the Sino-Russian Alliance has become a reality. Yes, significantly because of errors made by the Western world, but it's a reality. And therefore, in my view, we have no option. We have to go with the United States. Well, the United States, fortunately, the people in Washington today can do their mathematics a little better than they used to do during the time of Bill Clinton, when their mathematics was very, very faulty. And that is that without India in an Indo-Pacific alliance, that alliance cannot possibly hope to contain the Sino-Russian alliance in the Indo-Pacific. And after the Indo-Pacific, this alliance will definitely come to the Atlantic. So in the Indo-Pacific, I think the Chinese are saying we'll be the primary power. When both of us work and take over the Atlantic and dominate the Atlantic, you be the primary power. I'm not sure they're going to keep their word. Siberia, for example, will possibly become more Chinese, at least in ethnicity, than Russian. in not very long a time. But anyway, I think there's a clear understanding on those lines. So Americans understand that. I thought we also understand that. But then I saw the military chief, I mean, a man whom I deeply respect, a man who I know is an outstanding professional soldier, a man who's valiant, who's courageous, who's brilliant, talk in terms of the Quadrilateral Alliance not having any military component. In other words, a Gandhian alliance. I was a little taken aback by that because, frankly, we don't need that. I am a great admirer of Mahatma Gandhi. The problem is that if the other side, basically breaks certain rules of the game, well, it becomes difficult to be Gandhian and at the same time, not only to succeed, but to survive. And I'm saying that quite honestly as someone who wants peace. A strong alliance in the Indo-Pacific. I don't want it because I want a war between the United States and China or between India and China, although I'm sorry to say what has been happening across the decades would be intolerable in any other location, possibly any other member of the Quad except India. But we are a tolerant people, and thank God for that in many ways. But I'd like to say this kind of a strong military alliance is not needed for war. It's needed to prevent war. And that's why, frankly, I support the notion of an Indo-Pacific alliance where India and the United States, Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, Britain, France, Germany, we all work, not away, South Africa, Kenya, Madagascar. I mean, in different ways. A quad plus, these four will be the quad. Like the P5, I don't think the quad should allow any dilution of the P4, the permanent four. And then you have a plus. And before you have European partners, you need Asian partners. And that goes back to Asian NATO. You need partners in Asia because we in Asia, we don't have the short memories of some people in other parts of the world seem to have about the colonial period. We still remember many of our families, we have had people who were jailed, executed by the British, jailed by the British, who died at the hands of fighting them. And we still remember Bengal, for example, Bihar, millions of people were killed by Churchill. Why? Because he and Mountbatten diverted troop ships were filled with, ships filled with grain from Bengal, where they were needed, right into ports in Southeast Asia, where his well-fed troops threw most of that back into the sea. They didn't want to be obese, but millions died as a consequence. So I'd only like to say, frankly, we have to stare facts in the face. And we have to stare the reality of Cold War 2.0 in the face. I didn't reach this realization easily. Let me say that I harbored the feeling for a long time that even little fellows like me could basically, be able to persuade the Chinese Communist Party. And I have had the privilege of meeting people who are very close to the top person. So much so that in some of the offices, when you're having a conversation, the top person walks in and, of course, goes somewhere else and has that conversation with somebody else. Well, I thought I could persuade them to understand that, throwing India away by hostile behavior to India, as you have been demonstrating in practice, is not a good idea. I went about 4 times to the PRC during the Doklam situation. I'm sorry to say they were not convinced by me. It was very clear looking at their body language. They're always very courteous. They always respond in a very courteous way. And I really respect them for that. And I thank their civilization for that. But it was clear to me in about 2017, after Doklam, that this is an illusion. It's not an objective to be worked on. It's an illusion that I shouldn't waste any more time on. And from then on, I've been talking about Cold War 2.0 as an accomplished fact. The word Cold War should not really, because it's different. Soviet Union is not China. The type of war is different. A simple example, the virus, SARS-2 virus. I mean, I happen to believe that not only the main variant, but the two other variants, one conveniently called the UK variant and the other very conveniently called the India variant, were all baked in China, not in the Wuhan lab. In the Wuhan lab, if you go there today, I'm very convinced that you'll find that the Wuhan lab is doing absolutely no deadly research at all. All it's doing is making medicines, that too not for Chinese people, for humanity. I think, that is why Dr. Tedros said, oh, the Chinese must open up their facilities. What he meant was they should open up the Wuhan laboratory and they should open up the wet market so that we can all see how completely, I once went to Dachau, a place where murder of innocent human beings took place. And, it was all very nice and sanitary. There were photographs there. There were some pictures there. There were some films there. But the blood, the suffering, the pain, I wish there was some instead of, commentary. Some of the shrieking, some of the wailing, some of the crying of human beings treated by animals in the human form as other than human beings, because I can tell you what was done in Dachau was impermissible. Well, you had this virus. SARS was a cover-up, the same kind of cover-up that has happened in SARS-2. The difference was in SARS-1, WHO, scientists across the world, they quickly pointed out to inconsistencies in the story that the natural origin. It was natural origin, by the way. I'm convinced of that. It came from bats. It went to an intermediate species, and it went to civet cats, and then from there to humans. It didn't go through a lab. Well, the Chinese were open about it, and very soon afterwards. And I think Hu Jintao was the General Secretary. I'm glad he did that, because as a consequence, the world community was able to take action. And even China was enabled by the whole world to take action that essentially ensured the pandemic was not deadly. I mean, I'll give you it's an amusing story now. At that point in time, it's not amusing. I have great faith in my university and its expertise and in some of the other professionals that I know. And during this SARS-1, I think, if I'm not mistaken, George Fernandes was invited to visit China. And George, of course, was a very skeptical individual. He is one of the most wonderful people I've met. I mean, doesn't have the same political beliefs as Natwar, but I admire George for the same reason I admire Natwar. These are unique personalities. And George didn't believe only in what he got from the government, which was, don't go, it's terrible. He asked me, can you do something about it? Can you find out? And I checked back, and they said, find out if he's had falciparum malaria. Sorry, I can't pronounce it right. And I told George, have you had falciparum malaria? So he told me, what fancy malaria are you talking about? Falciparum malaria. So look, I had malaria. I had not once, but I think, or twice, or maybe once, I don't know. But I had malaria when I was this age or whatever. I went back and told those guys, they said, then don't worry. Anybody with falciparum malaria, which at that point in time meant a large, hundreds of millions of Indians are going to be immune to the SARS virus. That poor virus, when it enters the body of somebody who's had falciparum malaria, won't know what hit it. It's going to disintegrate very quickly. I told that to George. I said, I believe these scientists. And he said, well, what the heck? What have I got to lose? I mean, he had a lot to lose. But George was an outstandingly courageous man. He went to China. And frankly, he won the hearts, if not the minds of the Chinese by that gesture. I remember, for example, that there was some other kind of, global pandemic or something. or something, terrorism in Sri Lanka very recently, just before the election. And all the tourists from China completely stopped visiting Sri Lanka. My Sri Lankan friends, and I must confess, I have many. I love that country. I love its people. They said, and they used to keep telling me, the Chinese are there. Who cares for you guys? Who cares for you Indians? I told them, look, I only see Indian tourists. I don't see any Chinese tourists. I don't see any Western tourists. What's happened to them? And they kept very silent. The fact is, there were Indian tourists. We are not afraid of a few terrorists. And if we were afraid of that, I mean, this would not be the country it is, as safe and secure as it is. So our tourists never bother about some bunch of rotten terrorists. They used to keep flocking to Sri Lanka, while Chinese tourists stayed away overwhelmingly from Sri Lanka during that period. I think that is a wake-up call for the Sri Lankan people, at least, about the difference between, in the Indian system and the Chinese system. I'd only like to point out, we need a military alliance designed like NATO to deter aggression, to deter expansion by an authoritarian power, not to cause a war. And NATO stopped in its tracks any prospect of war in the countries it was protecting. And in the same way, my idea of an Indo-Pacific Charter, an Asian NATO, is not designed to ensure war, is designed to ensure deterrence to war by showing that there are deadly capabilities and that any combination goes to war with these deadly capabilities will find it impossible to win. And I think India, United States, Japan, Australia, these are essential partners. India, it's essential for China and Pakistan to ensure India and the United States never become military allies. It's essential for Russia to ensure that because it's afraid of losing India as a military partner. But it's essential for the Chinese, therefore, to ensure that it's kept apart. And if the Russians can do that heavy lifting, great. But the reality is, it's essential for them that we not be a military partner. It's essential for India and the United States that we be a military partner, that we form a defensive alliance, which I'm, with all apologies to those who believe in a Gandhian version of the Quad, I would like to see a Quad with a significant military component, which would be, I don't want to call it Asian NATO anymore. The word NATO is radioactive, mainly because I often told the Americans, during George Bush's time, for example, and back in the Clinton period, I used to go to the United States, and frankly, not many people in the Clinton White House or NSC or something was willing to meet somebody from that India, that troublesome country. They were very willing to meet Pakistanis or Saudis for reasons that you know, but not Indians. But the neocons were like me. They were footloose, and fancy free. Nobody was ready to meet them. Nobody was ready to meet me. And I established some bonds between them that came in useful during the Bush administration. Look, I'd like to say very, quite frankly, that it's very, very important. There was a chance during Narasimha Rao for an India-US alliance. That was thrown off the table by Bill Clinton. There was a chance during Vajpayee's time, Jaswant Singh as foreign minister, for an India-US alliance. I mean, I still believe we made a mistake in not sending a division into the Kurdish part of Iraq that would have given us a certain geopolitical presence. Today, Russia is a much smaller economic power than India, and it's a much more important geopolitical power in India, precisely because it is willing to use kinetic resources wherever needed. I'm not saying wherever, but wherever needed, in a way we have not been, frankly, except when we are directly attacked. The reality is that the danger is everywhere. Now, this particular virus, for example, I mean, the variant, the so-called India variant, the Delta variant, it was cooked in a lab in the same country that the original SARS-1 virus was created. The SARS, the other alpha variant, which targeted the UK was created at that point in time. And now, there's not been very good blood between Beijing and London. There is certainly not good blood between Beijing and Delhi. And I mean, in my view, the point of New Delhi, justifiably so. Well, the Chinese concept of war is not our concept of war. Notions of chivalry, notions of the conduct of war, ethics of war, etc., well, these notions, frankly, don't exist. And if they don't exist on the other side, and you follow them on your side, it's a surefire recipe for an outcome that is predetermined, if I may say so. Their concept of war is invading the mind, invading the healthcare, invading agriculture, invading industry, invading society. And I've come to a conclusion. I said, there are some excellent researchers who are tracking, for example, cyber activity. And they came to the conclusion, which some of which I made public in some of my public writings, that both the United States and India are subject to deliberate cyber intrusion by entities which are essentially controlled. In the case of the United States, from Russia and China. In the case of India, from Pakistan mainly, and then China, which are designed to ensure that this right and left fringe makes no sense. A lot of friends of mine on the right, frankly, have the same economic views as my friends in the left. A lot of my friends in the left have the same somewhat conservative views as my friends in the right. So this right-left makes very little difference except in the parade ground. But, I'd like to point out that they want the fringe to expand and expand and expand so that the moderate middle is squeezed and reduced in size in the United States and India. You see hate speech in the United States. You see hate speech in India. I don't want to go to the details. It's so obvious to anybody. This is designed to weaken our society. A society is strong when the moderate middle is not only strong, it expands at the expense of the fringe. When the fringe expands at the expense, and both fringes, in the US you saw the left fringe, they indulge in violence, the right fringe, indulge in violence. I mean, in the case of Trump, he only looked at the violence from the left fringe. In the case of Biden, he seems to be bothered more almost entirely about the violence from the right fringe. Well, they both make the mistake. Both fringes are dangerous and both should be treated equally. As in India, the reality is anything designed to divide society, anything designed to divide the moderate middle and lower it, because unless we have an expansion of the moderate middle, we are not going to retain a stable democracy. And from that point of view, I'd like to say that's why Cold War 2.0, we may not realize it, the Chinese are already involved in Cold War 2.0. And if anybody believes they have a chance of getting them on our side, well, I'd like to point to a guy called Nalapat, who believed up to 2017 it was possible to convince them by various logic and reasoning that it doesn't make sense for them to hang on to Pakistan, that Pakistan is going to be their Afghanistan. What it was for the USSR is going to be China's Afghanistan, is going to be Pakistan. Well, I gave up around 2017. I continue to go there because I respect that country. It's important to, and I very much have respect for the quality of the people that Xi Jinping has around them. But if you think they're not already realizing they're at war, I think you're living under an illusion. And may I say one final thing before we, again, this segment will answer, I know that my answer is a little long-winded. It comes partly from my Malayali heritage. I don't know if she agrees with me, but also partly generally because in conversations of more than 2 or 3 people, I don't really talk very much. I hardly talk at all. But I'd only like to point out that this is a reality of life today. This conflict where China and the United States, for example, is actively involved. I'll tell you why I knew that. I think it was in 2018, if I remember. I was again there, and and we talked about the trade war between the China and the US that Donald Trump had initiated. And I said that, look, I mean, possibly maybe it'll be over by the time congressional elections over if it doesn't play well or something. They only smiled at me because Chinese are extremely polite people. Whether they're communist or non-communist, they're very polite people. And just before I was about to leave to the airport in Beijing to catch my Air China, I think, flight back to Delhi, I was given a book to read. They said, in the context of that conversation we had over dinner with X, Y, and Z, I'm not going to name X, Y, and Z, except that I believe they are, I have reason to believe that they're extremely close to the current structure. The book they gave me, with typical Chinese subtlety, was Mao Zedong's book on protracted war with Japan. And when I had read all of Mao, forgotten most of it, but still retained some in my memory. I remembered protracted wars, but I reread it anyway. It's a slim book. I'd advise everybody to read it because there are two lessons that Mao raises in that particular book. One is anybody who believes that we, our side, that is in this case the Communist Party side, is going to win the war easily against the Japanese and their KMT collaborators. That was the rhetoric of the Communist Party, that KMT was just, a satellite of the Japanese. KMT had the same, absolutely fake thing about the Communist Party, but was throw that person out immediately. The second point is anybody who believes that we are going to lose this war, that we will not inevitably win this long, hard, tough war, throw immediately. I think these are important lessons which are valid in India as well. Anybody who believes that we are in an easy contest and a few teas and lunches and dinners and meetings at the border or in Delhi or anywhere else is going to settle them, well, I'm not sure that they're right. And anybody who goes on television and in writing and says, whoa, what the hell? We can fight this alone. We are India and we don't need anybody. And for God's sake, any country keep out. We'll tackle this on our own. In fact, we'll go right through Tibet and Xinjiang like a knife through butter entirely on our own. Well, I'm afraid those kind of people also, I'm not sure they should be taken seriously. And unfortunately, both these kinds of people are taken more seriously than others who are, let's put it in this way, I would say the moderate middle of this particular discussion. So that's frankly why I believe an armed alliance is necessary to deter war, and why, when they gave me that book, the hint that they gave was, they're too polite to say that, is look, we know we are in a long, protracted war with the United States. This war is not going to go away easily, and it's going to end in our victory. Usually, they are fighting an existential war of systems with the United States and other democracies. And they will not stop until either they are overcome or the democratic system is overcome by one means or the other, including by a meltdown of the moderate middle and an expansion of the fringe.
Right. So, firstly, at the outset, let me take 10 seconds out and congratulate you for your book. And I think I speak on behalf of all of us present here that we are very excited to read it and hear your views in it. So, sir, you also did cover a lot of ground during your discussion, in response to this question, making a very pragmatic case for a military NATO. Going forward, I'll just ask you to
Not NATO at all, Vishali, please. It's definitely not NATO. A partnership.
Okay, right. Definitely.
A brotherhood.
So, sir, definitely, sir. So, sir, just I'd like to ask you to elaborate on this one point where you spoke about Taiwan, Australia. After which I'd invite Mr. Pandya to make his comments. Just if you could talk about how you view the middle power coalition, so to say, emerging in the Indo-Pacific, and how do you view it as playing out within this Asian brotherhood, like you pointed out?
I'd like to say that way back in the 1990s, it was P.V. Narasimha Rao who basically gave recognition to Taiwan. No other government had the guts to do it. This man who was called Timid did it. And very importantly, he gave full diplomatic status to Israel. Till that time, Israel was only allowed to have a consulate in Mumbai. It was very close to our house, so we could almost, in a sense, look into the backyard of the consul. But it was a consulate in Mumbai. I think the consul's house, by that, incidentally. But and that was. But he is the one who did that. And Rushali, if I may say so, I am among those who basically strongly encouraged him, and he had a habit of consulting people from outside the box, so to speak. People who are, from journalism, from academics, whatever. He used to spend hours and hours, just talking and discussing things with us. Even when with one or two, maybe one, when he was a prime minister, even. And I think that is one of the reasons why he framed such wonderful policies. He didn't shut himself up to only the bureaucracy or to only a select band of views, and which keep getting recycled and recycled and recycled like a kaleidoscope. The same pieces keep coming together in different patterns, but they're the same pieces. Rao believed in changing the kaleidoscope. And I used to push for the case of Israel and Taiwan. And one or two of those conversations, I think, subsequently, I do believe that some of them somehow came to the notice of the Taiwanese. At that point in time, not too many people in the bureaucracy were very happy with either. They said that, if Israel is given full recognition, Muslims in India will be very unhappy. The Muslim world will be unhappy. We depend this much on oil, etc. And Taiwan, what are you talking about? What about the Chinese? 62 was an aberration. Well, two things, I think. Frankly, I think, some things happened which convinced me at this point in time that my assessment was right. And that is the way the Muslim community has accepted what has happened. In the case of the Ram Janambhoomi. And may I add that I believe, frankly, that if the Hindus confine their ask to the holy sites of Kashi, Mathura, and Ayodhya, and to these alone, I don't believe that the Muslim community, 99.9999% of them, will object to this if it's explained to them and they realize that we regard them as what they are, brothers and sisters of ourselves, and that is exactly what Muslims are to Hindus. We are brothers and sisters of each other. We have the same DNA. We have the same Hindutva cultural roots. And Hindutva, what does it mean? I wrote that long back in the Times of India, the 1990s, that our roots are Vedic, they are Mughal, they are Western. You can't be ashamed of any of them. You have to embrace all three of them because all three of them are in our cultural DNA. So I think I was able to convince, to some extent, maybe among the very few who convinced him of that. Certainly about Taiwan, I used an argument which I thought was a killer argument, and that is, look, you've been looking at getting a good relationship with the United States. You recognize the importance for modern India of that. Rao recognized the 21st century. He saw the 21st century way back in the 1990s when he was prime minister. And till today, there are not too many politicians who have recognized that this is the 20th century. It's not the 20th. It's the 21st century. It's not the 20th. It's not even the 19th or the 18th. It's the 21st century. Rao recognized the 21st century. I said, if you do this to Taiwan, well, Israel, obviously, the Americans love Israel. And, and let's be honest, I love the Jewish community. And it's my personal view that after what they've been through in Europe, I think they deserve that little bit of land, and which is historically very much a part of their heritage. That's a different matter altogether. But, Taiwan and Israel, the Americans are then going to, even a guy like Bill Clinton, who seems to be a bit of an idiot, frankly, and I'd like to say this today, and frankly, Obama 1 was a disappointment because of the Hillary shadow. Obama 2, once he freed himself of the Clintonite shadow, he was much better on Cuba, on Iran, on various other matters once he freed himself of that. Well, I said, even a dolt like Bill Clinton will understand the importance of India. Rao liked that argument. He used it. He went ahead with both. And lo and behold, many of the very people who opposed me very badly used to tell me, these guys don't like it, this chap doesn't like it. The same chaps I saw making public statements, oh, what a wonderful decision by Prime Minister Rao. What a wonderful decision on Taiwan. What a wonderful decision on Israel. I'm so happy that they had this epiphany. I wish they had it earlier, but better late than never. I congratulate them for their early recognition of this particular thing. But I'd only like to say I've been interested in Taiwan from that time. I was the host for Ma Ying-jeou, who was at one time, as you know, president of Taiwan. I was also the Indian host of the host of Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, who is the current president of Taiwan. After a very successful visit, after about a year, I wanted a second visit. Unfortunately, the Ministry of External Affairs shot it down. Well, they must be having their reasons. I mean, the Chinese, for example, look, it's not that I haven't had contact. I didn't have contacts with Chinese. I still have contacts with them. I had extensive contacts with them in that period. But my point was that, look, this is what I believe as an Indian is good. If you don't like it, you're welcome to stop seeing me. I'm going to give you the Indian point of view. And which is one reason why after 2017, I used to more or less make every trip to Beijing via Taipei, sometimes via Seoul, sometimes via some other capitals, but usually via Taipei, because Taipei is somewhat like coming from Rawalpindi to Delhi. It has about the same kind of people in Delhi appreciate that. The people in Beijing appreciated that. My point is, I am Indian. What I'm saying is what I believe to be the truth. And if you listen to me, that's fine, but I remain Indian. And that's one reason I believe that I have some respect for them, because despite very clear, what I've said about the Americans, for example, about Iran, I've said from day one that the government made a big mistake in not buying Iranian oil, a huge mistake in going along with Donald Trump. He was in some ways a bigger idiot than Bill Clinton, but we went along with Donald Trump. That was a very, very big mistake. And we have made some mistakes, if I may say so, including on Iran, that I think is unfortunate and which I think is not in our national interest. But I've not hesitated to say that in America, and in America to my Jewish friends. And these are Jewish friends who, frankly, the first India-Israel-US conference was held in 2003 organized by me, by the Department of Geopolitics at Manipal University. And as UNESCO Peace Chair, I organized it. And the organization, the Jewish organization that was my partner, JINSA, is one of the most anti-Iranian organizations in the world. But they knew my views on Iran. They knew my views on Syria. And my views on Syria were, the Assads are people you need to look and see if you can get on your side, so that, because let me tell you one thing, they're not religious fanatics. They're Alawites. Alawites are not religious fanatics at all. They're not Wahhabi. And I distinguish Wahhabi from Muslim. They're very different. And I distinguish, for example, Khomeinis from Shia. Khomeinis are not Shia. Wahhabi are not Muslim. So Alawites definitely are Shia in my view, but they are extremely moderate in their view. So there's good ground for you to come to an understanding with them. Well, to the very end, the Israelis refused to, even when the Assad regime was basically facing so-called freedom fighters who were being supported, armed, funded by the United States, by NATO, very unwisely, because these guys, one day they're in Al-Qaeda, next day they're a freedom fighter, third day they go back to ISIS, fourth day they're a freedom fighter, they send their wives and children to Turkey. Well, these are not, I've seen them. I've seen them in in some of my travels in the Middle East, and I go there extensively because I'm a Malayali, and as far as Malayalis and Arabs are concerned, frankly, the Arabs always call us Malabaris. Indians in general are called Hindi. We are called Malabaris. And for us, Arabs were special and are special. But I'd only like to say, very frankly, that, this is the situation. I've been very open in Washington about my leanings towards Iran. I've been very open in China about my view that for many, many years, that India and the United States needs to enter into a military alliance. Is not directed against China so long as China is not going to initiate a war. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. I didn't say anything different, quite frankly. So all I'd like to say, frankly, is that, look, I have explained the context of my thinking. And Taiwan is a country that has invested $1 trillion in the People's Republic of China. Dr. Tsai went from may not be day one, but certainly the first month of her presidency, about 5 odd years ago, initiated a move to integrate Taiwanese supply chains and Taiwanese companies into US defense and security supply chains. And she's done a very thorough job of it. The supply chains, the defense and security supply chains of Taiwan, the United States, are integrated in a manner which is frankly very much more than what we have seen between the United States and India, for example. Between Japan and Taiwan are now integrated very firmly. And this is a deliberate policy of Taiwan, which essentially means if you're a high-tech unit working in China, and Taiwanese are maestros of high-tech, whether it is, computer chips or anything else, maestros of that. Sometime, maestro, you produce something in China, you can't sell it in the United States, in much of Europe, and hopefully in India as well. Almost certainly in India as well. Prime Minister Modi was the first to have that apps ban. That was wonderful. That was an early recognition of him, that he understands the reality of the situation very well. So Taiwan could be a very significant investment partner for India. Even more significant than Europe, which frankly is more interested in getting capital than giving capital, or the Americans, frankly, which are, basically have very one-sided deals. Their idea of fair deal, 95% agree with what I do, and 5% I'll agree with you. That's a fair deal. Well, unfortunately, today's China is very similar to yesterday's United States. So I'd like to say Taiwan is a very important component in the security of the Indo-Pacific. The Japanese understand that, Australia understand that, the United States understand that, and I think more and more people in India understand.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. So thank you so much for giving us a lot to think about. Your ideas are innovative, to say the least, and the way you've revisited your idea itself, the Asian NATO concept, was very refreshing. So at this point, if I could please invite Mr. Pandya to come in with his questions and take the discussion forward. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you, Rushali.
Thank you, Rushali. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today and giving such a vivid and elaborate discussion. Your thoughts on the Indo-Pacific affairs. I just have a few quick questions, just to put in brief, you just mentioned about the Taiwan. So we recently had a major event on a roundtable discussion on India-Taiwan relations, and we are also going to have another discussion on the interaction between journalists from Taiwan and India. So we are just working on those lines, just to promote India-Taiwan ties. Okay. So my first question, and Shiju also has a similar question, so I won't repeat that question. I'll just stick to that only. So coming back to Russia, I have a feeling, I've interacted with many people in the Indian official establishment, like the strategic circles. I'm talking about the government people. That dependence on Russia as far as the defense part is concerned, that's huge. Like until 2055, 2060, for our weapons and for our defense procurement, we are severely dependent on them. So Indians and Indian official establishments see that as a very, very serious thing. So given that thing, they are a little hesitant to abandon that. And recently, the Russian President, Mr. Putin, also made it clear that if it's about China and India, India is more or less on its own. So how do you look at that? How India is going to handle that? Because that is going to be a major handicap. First question.
Abhinav, I must point out that I have never been in government in any way whatsoever. I'm an outsider to government, and I would say thank God for that. So I really don't know what the government is thinking, but I can tell you from my very limited range of study that it is incompatible, for example, in a conflict between India and China. It will be involving dimensions and scale very different from any conflict between Pakistan and India. Very, very different, and significantly different even from 1962 or all the incursions that have been taking place, and frankly continued right into May 2020. That's why I'm glad for the first time India has dug its heels in, said nothing doing. Unless you go back to the line that you occupied in April 2020, well, forget about it. And I think we need to do a lot more in decoupling. Frankly, the lure of profit, the lure of money has unfortunately blinded many of the business people in India, many to forget about the fact that in 4 to 5 years, if you want to market outside China, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, a few other countries like that, well, buddy, you'll have to decouple your investment from China and your production units from China. Not every government is going to be as, what do I say, as courageous in matters of national security as a government that believes that today's Russia is anywhere like the Soviet Union. The Chinese joined hands with America. Mao Zedong, long back, wanted that. Mao Zedong from day one was not only looking at doubling the size of things, basically ensuring China has hegemony over the world. And in his case, what did he do? I remember in the 1950s, he gave a statement to some Western chap. I love swimming in the Yangtze. I would love swimming in the Mississippi. Well, somehow the hint was missed. What Mao said was, I would love to have a handshake with you guys, despite the filth and mud that we are throwing each other, despite the Korean War, and despite what later happened in the Vietnam War. I'd like to say that Nixon got that hint. Mao was still there in power, and he got that hint. And the two sides reached an accommodation on Russia. Frankly, the Chinese got it very early. The Americans got it by the 1970s. I think we have to understand the reality of Cold War 2.0. And part of that reality will be that a large number of weapons platforms that would like to move to India. Some platforms, for example, have shifted from Turkey. They don't exactly know where to relocate. They are still idling there. India is an ideal platform for air platforms and for many other platforms. But you can't have a situation in which companies are relocating from China because of, they're not going to admit in so many words, Cold War 2.0 to a country that has not made up its mind as to whether there's even a Cold War 2.0 or which side it's on. And so long as you have this, what you're talking about, 1940s, 50s, 60s, 2020, 2060 dependence on Russia, well, you're not going to convince almost all of them. Who's going to come to you? The Taiwanese are coming to you because they believe that you guys are not friendly to China. That's what they told me. I said, yes, you're right. But but at the same time, you're friendly to a country which is now a force multiplier for the Chinese military and which shares a tremendous amount of technical and other intelligence for the Chinese, and basically gets used as a cat's paw for the Chinese in America, for example, the same way the Chinese are using Pakistan as a cat's paw in India. Well, I'd like to say that, you need to smell the coffee. We have plenty of good, strong coffee, produced in Kerala, and I can send, some of that for you to smell. But I would like to say, look, if this opportunity is missed, it was not missed by Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s, and look where China is. If this is missed by us today, we'll be in 30 years or 40 years, what we were and what we are today, which is 1/5 the size of China economically. Well, that's certainly a wonderful thing. After all, we are a democracy. We are a wonderful democracy. We have a terrific culture. We have tremendous amount of languages. But frankly, if you ask me, am I happy that our economy is 1/5 the size of China's when we could easily be double the size of China's with a different set of policies? No, I'm not, frankly. And if you want to condemn this country for another 30 years of that kind of stagnation by making geopolitical choices that, in my view, are not choices, they are pretty negative and inevitable outcomes. I'm not saying, please understand one thing, I love the Russians. My wife and I have been to Moscow multiple times, St. Petersburg. Let me tell you, we love the Russians. They're an amazingly brave people. As far as Putin is concerned, he's a grandmaster par excellence on the global chessboard. He's playing a weak hand brilliantly. We have a strong hand that needs to be played brilliantly, very frankly. But Putin is a grandmaster. But may I say that you have to read the tea leaves. And the tea leaves are, and for the first time I'm beginning to believe in many years that there is a possibility that over time, the United States may understand that it's not as important to bring in Russia on your side as it is to bring India. But certainly in the context of the coming battle in the Atlantic, it's essential to bring Russia on your side, whatever the Germans or the Brits or the French are going to say. Well, I'd like to see Russia on our side. I'd like to see Russia on the Indian side. And when they say they know what they mean. And what does that mean? When a lot of our critical defense infrastructure is basically more transparent to them than it is to us. So I mean, I'm not a very great thinker or a great scholar, frankly. I was the country's first professor of geopolitics. I've been dabbling a little bit in that ever since. But I'm not as great a scholar as so many of the other scholars, in all the great places that you see, who say, no, the unshakable Indo-Russian Alliance. That's exactly what I mean. I'm sorry, this is not the Soviet Union. And if Putin is working for his own interest, Narendra Modi needs to work for the Indian interest. And Xi Jinping is working for what he believes is the Chinese interest. And if Xi Jinping succeeds, I can tell you, Putin will be a beneficiary. India will definitely not be a beneficiary. I can tell you, I can give you that prediction. And anytime you want, you can repeat that. I may be trolled for it once again. As you know, I've been trolled, I've been called various names. Sometimes our establishment says, oh, this guy is too pro-Chinese. Sometimes the establishment says, oh, this guy is too pro-American. And sometimes the establishment says, oh, even some tiny countries like Taiwan or Israel, oh, he's pro-Israel, he's pro-Taiwan. Look, I don't hide my likes and dislikes because I am pro-Indian. I believe in a liberal democracy. I believe in human rights and freedoms. And I'd like to say that I believe in saying what I believe. And if others troll me, I remember, for example, when my mother was, as per her wish, expressed to my wife and my sister-in-law, expressed, in her final days, to be buried and the location to be buried. We buried her in the Palayam Masjid. The amount of trolling I have received for years after that. Why didn't you cremate her? And these stories that she converted back to Hinduism, she was a Hindu. Well, if she converted, people used to badger her. Why don't you go back to being a Hindu? Why don't you go back to being Hindu? I didn't know that because she was living in Cochin. I was hardly seeing her in Cochin. When she was alone, they used to badger her. When her kids were there, they would keep away. And finally, my mother had a defense mechanism. Yes, of course, I've converted. I'm a Hindu. So now please leave my flat. And, she's talked to people. She's given conversations like that to get them off her back. But if she revealed to me that, or to her sons, that, or to her husband for that matter, that she ever wanted to reconvert when we, after it was sure that she had converted. I can assure you, she never revealed it to us. Maybe she trusted us less than she trusted all the many people who are talking so much nonsense about her. When it is my mother's wish. I am a Sanatani. I believe in Sanatan Dharma. But I can tell you one thing, when I am the eldest son, I have an obligation to follow my mother's wish. And I did so. I'm proud of it. I don't care what people think about it.
Thank you, sir. Hello. Yeah. And so two more questions for today's session. These are two last questions. Yeah. So first is, how strong is Quad? I mean, we already see an anti-Quad sort of an alliance coming up and acting in a much more coherent manner with much more clarity of thoughts. And I can mention a few countries like China, Pakistan, Iran, for that matter, with the signing of this recent $400 million strategic partnership between the China and Iran. North Korea is already with the China. Then we have Turkey with China, and Saudi Arabia also, like with the US backtracking, it's reaching out to Pakistanis, and Pakistan is mediating between the Iranians and Saudis. In the Middle East, we saw that these people are more or less on the same page. And then, I mean, even the countries like Philippines, and I mean, they have their own reservations when it comes to China. So, I mean, what do we think? I mean, are we on the same page in the Quad? Yeah.
Abhinav, I'd like to say I don't believe that Pakistan is ever going to leave the Chinese embrace. I don't believe that. I can assure you, and I don't think Pakistan is going to stop training, funding, arming, and sending across terrorists to Iran. Pakistan does dirty work for both sides, and that's why it's got such a high degree of protection from one side for its obvious connect with the other. What does the dirty work of two large countries? I'm not going to name them. I'm a polite human being, so I don't believe that. As for your question about the Quad, I'll answer in one sentence. Any security alliance is as strong as its weakest link.
Thank you. So just one more question, sir. So we saw that, I mean, we are negotiating, like you mentioned that one of the general was talking about the Gandhian way of having a Quad alliance. Okay? And then we are talking about various multiple domains, but when discussing within the Quad, but when it comes to China, they more or less seem to have a very determined vision, be it about their influence operations or aggression in Ladakh or sending sorties to Taiwan. So what is the way out? I mean, do you see some kind of a military aggression or a military, I would say, tactic to deter the Chinese?
Look, I'd like to avoid any further kinetic confrontation with anybody, Pakistan or China. I think Pakistan is in pretty bad shape, and they think they're going to belt down Afghanistan, but I can assure you, they are facing meltdown themselves. The Pashtuns are feeling fed up of being treated as second-class citizens, together with the Baloch and the Sindhis and the Shia. And I think the China is in deep trouble. But I can only say that it's a very evolving situation as to what is happening. But the reality is that we have a golden chance in India. We have a golden chance to ramp up our rate of growth to double digits over the course of a generation, the way the Chinese did. And that is to leverage our geopolitical strengths. I wanted that in 2003. George Bush and Cheney were, frankly, as idiotic as to trust the arsonist with the keys of the fire engine. I mean, George W. Bush never pretended to be an intelligent man. And Cheney also, poor chap, doesn't pretend to be anything of a scholar or an intellectual. They were not. Otherwise, they would not have made this kind of a mistake that Clinton made, they repeated. And because at that time, it was, at least from my understanding, and I can tell you, I've dealt with all parties. I've dealt with senior people in all parties, and my habit is, very frankly, never go into a meeting unless it's usually one-on-one, or at least a few hours of duration, because anything less than that is a waste of time. Well, I would really like to point out, very frankly, that the situation facing India is such that we can use it to our advantage. significantly in the economic sphere. I'd like to say that unless we ensure that the fringes shrink at the expense of the fringes shrink at the expense of these social media and other intruders who are trying to expand their boundaries, in which I'm sorry to say in India, Pakistan, and China involved, in America, the Russians, the Chinese involved. The problem with Joe Biden, he thinks it's only Republicans who are involved. They only talk about domestic terrorism. In our country, we fight each other on domestic. Oh, this people in India, that people in India. For heaven's sake, the cybersphere is a domain that is under contest and which can be conquered, parts of it taken over and utilized the way the conqueror wants. Let's keep that in mind. And the cybersphere is extremely important in influencing young minds. I must, as I said, Abhinav, I'm not going to talk about the establishment that one said that I was too pro-China, one said that I was too pro-US. Frankly, I'm not going to talk about these people at all. I respect them, I like them, and I really got enormous respect for them. But I also like to congratulate the Indian Army for the gallantry they showed at Galwan. I think we showed the Chinese military exactly what the army was capable of. All that rubbish that they were fed by GHQ Rawalpindi about the Indian soldier, they immediately realized what it was. It was rubbish. And I think that has been a wake-up call for the Chinese. They smelled the coffee, which is why I think they've intensified their activity designed to ensure that Indian society goes the way they want US society to go, into conflict and meltdown from within. And that is something we need to avoid, if you ask me frankly. And that is a very real danger that's facing us, and that we need to be aware of. Some of us don't realize the need for a military alliance until it's too late. Some of us don't realize the danger of Cold War 2.0 until it's too late. Well, if you don't realize the danger that the Chinese method of warfare is comprehensive warfare, across the board warfare, I hope it's not going to be too late by the time we finally realize, because look, it's not just troops on the border, it's in a lot of other theaters that people who fight such a war are active on the other side. We are capable of defending ourselves. We're capable of basically more than defending ourselves, but we have to first understand the kind of war that we are fighting. And it's not the same kind of war as 62 or 71 or any possible war with Pakistan. It's a war against an entirely different kind of adversary. And we have to tailor tactics based on that. And part of these tactics are an international alliance. And part of that is to de-link at least our critical defenses from those who are members of the rival alliance. If these are not obvious points, frankly, all I can say, I am an Indian citizen. No matter what happens, I'm not going to take advantage of any other country and say, oh no, you're okay, you seem to be a bright guy, something that people in India don't seem to think. Well, and become a citizen of some country. I'm going to remain a citizen of India, but I can tell you it won't be pleasant for any of us in India unless the people at the top realize the nature of the war that they are fighting, the dimensions of the war that they are fighting, and understand the requirements, the absolute mandatory requirements needed to win this war.
Thank you very much, sir. I mean, I certainly agree with you that, gone are the days when we were having a nice time with our comfort zone in the times of strategic hedging and strategic autonomy. And this is the time when we should accept and, we should really think about having serious international alliances. That's the future. So with this, I guess we can end this. And Rushali, I would invite you to give a vote of thanks. Are you there, Rushali? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So, of course, at the very outset, I think we should unmute ourselves and give a round of applause virtually to, of course,
Please don't.
Professor Nalapat. So thank you.
No, please don't do
Sir,
that.
So in that case, I'll just stick with my words and thank you once again for taking the time out and being here with us. You've really given us a lot to think about, and it's I am still processing a lot of it, because these are unique ideas which I haven't come across anywhere else. And I think the most interesting aspect of it for me was how you revisited your own ideas to suit the newer geopolitical times that we're living in. I'll also, of course, thank Mr. Pandya for organizing this, and he is the one who brought us all together, and all our team members who are all
I thank Abhinav
here.
and I thank Vishali for giving me an opportunity to speak to young people. You are the future of India, and you'd better expect that the right choices get made today, because the choices made today are going to affect generations to come.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, sir.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you.
And sir, if I could just add on to one thing, is that this is a part of our new series which we are starting, which is exclusively focused on the Indo-Pacific, and of course, no better way to begin with your interaction. So we'll be putting this up on our website and on our social media platforms. And we would really love your guidance on this. So what we're looking at is, we'll of course have more webinars and videos. So sir, if there are any suggestions that you have on people who we should invite and how we should go about that, that would be very, very great. And if I could also take this opportunity to invite you to, maybe if you could just sort of, like what you discussed today about revisiting the idea of Asian NATO, if you could have a piece on that, which we would publish on our website, I think Mr. Pandey would agree with me, that would be absolutely great for not only us in the team, but also the greater the readership which we have nationally and internationally, sir.
Really, I'd love to do that, but I'd only like to say that I am doing a fair amount of writing. Unfortunately, a lot of it is not in the public domain. A lot of it is in the public domain, and I think a lot of that is accessible. I'd like to only say that I think a lot of that is accessible, and I think more and more people seem to be coming around to my point of view. I haven't changed my point of view for 30 years. More and more people's point of view, and many of them come to me and say, this is the truth. This is what is the real situation. I don't know if you realize that, meaning me. And I smile and say, of course I didn't. Thank you for informing me. But Vishali, I'm grateful to you. You guys are the future, and you also better work. And that goes for you too, Abhinav.
Thank you.
You're going to be around for a long time. And because believe me, the decisions made in the next 3 to 5 years are going to impact us for the next 30 to 50 years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Just one last announcement. So can you hear me? So we have a webinar on 23rd. It's on Israel's foreign policy. Registration link is there on our website, yusanasfoundation.com. We are getting a very eminent panel of scholars and experts from Tel Aviv University, IDC Herzliya, and Georgetown University. Please join us. It's going to be an interesting and extraordinary event. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Madhav, sir. Thanks all the participants who joined us today.